Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's Thursday, so acts of God notwithstanding, we should be piling into Mistria from 12 o'clock. Theresa May due to unveil the Conservative Party manifesto shortly after 11 o'clock. We will take that speech live and probably just dance around it before and afterwards in terms of your reactions, your thoughts, your responses. It's social care that will top, I think, the news agenda for the rest of the day. And I have been saying to you, can I get two I told you so's out of the way? There's a reason why the audience for this programme is the biggest that it's ever been. It's because of all the predictions that we get correct. I told you social care in the coming years would just assume bigger and bigger and bigger impact. And I also told you about 5 years ago, during the early days of the coalition government's austerity programme, that pensioners would be next, that eventually they would, if this narrative continued, have to start chipping away at old age pensioners. Both of those will come true today, but it is the social care that we will concern ourselves with first. And that is an astonishing, in my view, a myopia, a collective myopia that the nation is suffering from. We don't like thinking about the future. Oddly, I don't know how old you are, but you somewhere inside, you still think you might be immortal. I've got a feeling, this is going to sound a little bit weird, but hey, I've got a feeling that as a country, we reflect that human capacity to delude ourselves about immortality. We should all be making much, much bigger provision for our old age and even for our death. You know, we are all, the one thing you can be certain of, we're all going to cark it one day. And many of us will leave family behind, and we should be living our lives accommodating that knowledge. But we can't. I don't know whether it's an evolutionary thing, that you somehow become the fittest and a better survivor if you live in that weird, which I think we all do, that weird denial. You know that mortality is inevitable, but at the same time you somehow don't think it's going to happen to you. And I think we're doing the same on a national level with social care. I think we're sort of, yeah, James, it's huge. It's a massive problem. It's huge, yeah, it's massive. But, you know, I'm not going to worry about it now. And then suddenly you start worrying about it when it's too late, when you get smacked around the back of the head with a frying pan by life. So what the Tories are proposing, it seems, is just a little bit strange, because you know the old adage about kicking the can down the road. It needs to be slightly finessed for this policy, because it seems to me that they're kicking a can down the road, but the can's going to get bigger with every kick. It's like they're kicking a snowball down the road, if you like. What happens when the generation we've spent a lot of time talking about in recent months, what happens when they need social care and they don't have any homes? They don't have assets. We were talking yesterday again about the generation that is really giving up on the dream of home ownership. So although this is, you know, 40, 50 years hence, it is just a time bomb that's ticking ever louder. I don't know what the answer is. And that's why I love this topic. I love this idea. I won't say I love this policy, but as a conversational topic for us, I absolutely love it, because I don't know what I think of it. I have no idea in terms of thumbs up or thumbs down. Makes you realise how binary everything's become in life lately. It really does. As a phone-in host, there are two ways of approaching politics. There's the stuff when the producers and I have a chat in the morning. There's the stuff that we know will make the switchboard light up. But then we have to ask ourselves, is it going to be interesting? This will not make the switchboard light up. It will on this show, because we've got such clever listeners. But traditionally, it's not a topic that sets up a switchboard, because it's not got an easy answer. I'm promising you now that this issue is more important than Brexit. It's more important than immigration. It's more important, arguably, than education. It may be more important than many areas of NHS conversation, but it's just not interesting in the way that it needs to be. I don't know how you sex it up, how you make social care a more urgent and immediate issue, but I know from doing this job for the last 10 or so years, I know from doing this job that this is bigger than everything. There's all these little questions that I throw in every now and then, like, what happens when all of the people who are paying rent at the moment don't have jobs anymore? How are we going to cope with that as a country? All the people who are paying rent in the private sector, when they don't have jobs, when they don't get a wage anymore, what's going to happen? These numbers are growing. Even bigger than that is the question, what happens when the next generation or the generation after that who don't routinely have assets or own their own homes, what happens when they need social care? This looks to me, and the phone lines are open, I genuinely mean it when I say I don't know what to make of it. It's approximately, and all the facts and figures I put in front of you are open to challenge, because I've single-sourced them from some of the coverage today. About 1 in 10 of us will end up needing social care costing more than £100,000, right? About 1 in 10 of us. And most of us will spend less than £20,000 on our social care, our end-of-life care. This is the non-medical stuff. Weirdly, dementia doesn't fall under the remit of the NHS. So if you're wealthy and you contract cancer and it kills you over a period of years, your fortune is safe. Your fortune is protected, okay? If you're relatively wealthy and you contract dementia and you have a slow decline over a number of years, your fortune is not protected. In fact, they'll have all of it except your last £100,000. Don't panic, because it will be secured posthumously in most cases, so only after you die and your estate is sold will you repay the cost of your care. But that's the first hurdle, and that's pretty scary, right? I haven't dealt with dementia on a personal basis, but my goodness me, I have thousands of listeners who have. And the stories they have shared with us over the years are utterly heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, utterly. And yet they have to pay for their care. There's a massive anomaly there that Theresa May has chosen, I think, to ignore. And the other element of this, the other really interesting element of this, is the notion of spreading the burden. So if you could come up with a policy, and we are coming at this from every angle today, so if you can come up with a policy yourself, ring in and share it. But here's the thing. If you spread the burden somehow so that we all cover the costs of the relatively small minority of people that end up needing this level of social care, then it seems to me to be fairer. What we've got today is a policy proposal that effectively says, if you get this particular condition, because it's mostly going to be dementia, that means you can't look after yourself. If it's a physical disease you'll be looked after by the National Health Service. This is for people who aren't ill in a conventional sense, but are very, very ill in the sense of dementia. If you're unlucky enough to end up with that condition or something similar, you've got to pay for all your care yourself. And if you don't end up with it, you don't pay for anything. So the 90% of the population that will never need this sort of social care are home and dry. We get to keep all our parents' assets. We get to inherit it all ourselves. The 10% that do pick up pretty much all of the bill single-handedly. It's the opposite. I'm thinking out loud now. I may have made mistakes. If I have, please correct me. But it's the opposite of the NHS. It's the opposite of health insurance, isn't it? This. The idea that we all pay and only some of us need it. That's kind of one of the most beautiful things about the NHS. We all pay and only some of us need it. This is the opposite of that. This is, if you can pay, we'll take your money. Most people won't pay, won't need to pay, but if you haven't got assets in excess of £100,000, you won't pay anything at all. It's a mess. What do you think? 0345 6060 973. And I think, and I'm criticising myself now, I'm almost apologising. I think this slightly messy introduction proves why this is so easy to kick down the road. It's almost impossible to get a proper handle on it. I thought, at 10 o'clock this morning, I thought I had a handle on it. I thought that line I used in the trail that you heard at 9:45 was going to be a key to open up the whole issue. The idea that it's a form of death tax or levy that is randomly hitting people unfortunate enough to end up with dementia. That's true. But it doesn't give me a handle on the bigger issue. The gentleman charged with carrying out the last government's review into funding suggests that these proposals show a less than full understanding of the problem. The biggest problem facing elderly people is not addressed by this. It's Sir Andrew Dilnot who's castigated the policy that the Prime Minister is set to publish later today. What I mean, the central policy is that the ceilings going up from £23,250 to £100. That's the threshold of personal assets at which people will be eligible for state help with residential care costs. David Cameron proposed a cap of £72,000. Mrs May will now argue that that limit is no longer needed. It's complicated, it's difficult, it's ugly, but it's bloody important. Do you know what I want to ask you as well this morning? That's a slightly odd question. How do we make it matter more, this issue? How do we make it matter more? It is potentially the biggest threat to the country's economic security, I believe. I know that sounds a little hyperbolic, but I believe that. Potentially, it's the biggest threat by far to this country's economic security. More and more elderly people with mentally degenerative conditions needing round-the-clock care, needing to be looked after, needing people to be paid to look after them. More and more of them living longer and longer and longer and not covered by health insurance or the National Health Service. What are we going to do about it? This answer effectively says, well, if you've got assets in excess of £100,000 and you end up with dementia, we'll take all your money to look after you. And yet, if you'd ended up with cancer, you'd be looked after by the NHS. Sorry, this is muddled, but I think it's quite a useful illumination and illustration of why this subject is A, so important, and B, so hard to unravel. The Tories are going to have a go at unravelling it today. What do you think of their policy? And just to remind you of the country that we live in, it was called a death tax by the Daily Mail and the Daily Express when Andy Burnham proposed it. Today, their front pages tell you that you won't have to sell your home to pay for your care. They're selling it as good news. And then you turn to the Times and you learn that thousands will be hit by new care costs. It's quite weird, isn't it? Elderly property owners will pay more for home aid. And yet on the Mail, you won't have to sell your home to pay for your care. But just tell me what you make of it. It's 10:15. Present, only people entering residential care have the value of their property in addition to savings and investments taken into account. That is set to change. This means test applied by local authorities will see you left with £100,000 of your own assets. Everything else is up for grabs for your social care, but only if you get something like dementia, not if you get something terminal like cancer. Russell Grant is a pal of mine. You'll know Russell, and he knows what he's talking about on this. He cared for his grandmothers, both of his grandmothers, if I recall correctly, and is now an Alzheimer's campaigner. He's just tweeted me to say that this manifesto is inequitable and ill-conceived. He might be right. I think he probably is right, but it doesn't mean it won't work. You just sell it to people as, well, look, you're probably not going to have to do this. It's only 1 in 10 people end up paying more than 100,000. You'll be fine. I don't know. I just don't know. Will's in Liverpool. Will, what would you like to say?
Well, it's just a general topic discussion about the issue of adult social care at the moment and the ticking time bomb that concurrent governments have just refused to deal with. I've got loads and loads of calls, Will. So tell me why you've rung in. I'll go with my experience then. At the moment, I care for 2 parents. The mother-in-law lives with us in a granny flat. The father lives round the corner. We had to take this decision because social care isn't there for our older generation now. We've not invested in infrastructure such as dementia-friendly living accommodation, extra care accommodation, because what happened a few years ago under a budget...
So, well, what do you think of this policy, mate? What do you think of the manifesto proposals that are being revealed today?
I think it's shocking because the issue is it's not addressing the real issue. That is, adult social care doesn't exist in this country. We haven't invested in specialist dementia units or specialist extra care living. We've got pensioners living in accommodation that's not suitable for their needs now, my father included. That's causing blocking issues on the housing market. We've got issues with bed blocking going in the hospitals. Last year I had 2 parents in the same ward concurrently at the same time.
I hear you. I'm going to crack on, mate, because I want to really have a close look at what we think about today's proposals and today's policies. I feel enormous sympathy for the situation you find yourself in, and I'll talk to you at greater length next time we're doing a sort of broad conversation about social care. But I want to know what people think about this £100,000 proposal. There's some pithy descriptions of the imbalances and the inequities I've I've been trying to describe. This is from the economics editor of the Financial Times. Rich heart attack victims' children win. Rich dementia victims' children lose big. That's the point, I think, that I'm failing to properly pass on to you at the moment. If you've dropped dead unexpectedly at the age of 80 and you've got £1 million in your house, it all goes to your kids. If you die slowly over 15 years from the age of 65 to 80 of dementia, all of the money goes on your care. Richard is in Northfleet. Richard, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. I've just actually gone through this, and some of your figures, I'm afraid, are way out. What we're not mentioning is the fact that there is a current cap on this.
Of £23,250. I mentioned it 8 minutes ago.
Absolutely. Sorry, I was driving. But I've just gone.
Well, next time, mate, I'm going to wind my neck in a little bit. Don't ring in and tell me I've made a mistake if you didn't actually hear what I said, all right?
Sorry, James.
Carry on.
Okay. We've just had to sell our house because my mother was struck down with dementia.
You've sold your mother's house?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, because part of what I thought I heard was that you said, and I do stand to be corrected again, was that they don't take the money until after the death.
Yes, that's today's policy. That's today's policy proposal.
But in the last manifesto, that 23,200 was going up to 73,000.
72. Delayed. 72,000 delayed until 2020.
And they didn't do it.
No, that's been dropped.
Just simply, and it cost me, well, my brother and I, it cost us approximately 350,000 quid.
How much?
They didn't do it.
How much of that has gone?
I believe.
Sorry, go on. A lot. Yes, I think. Crikey. I think. I mean, the question of why would you believe it? I think because Theresa May kind of has to deliver, doesn't she?
Well, yeah, I think I may have said that a couple of years ago that she has to deliver.
No, David Cameron wasn't.
Papers, they dropped it.
You're talking about the 2015 manifesto. So if I was, if I held a brief for David Cameron, I'd say you're quite right. They hadn't brought that cap in, but then we had Brexit, and you know, I promise you, I would have done, but I resigned. So there is. I appreciate. I'm not here to say,
well,
give the Tories a break.
Before he resigned.
Yeah, I know, but it could have still happened. Just because it didn't happen in the you know, the year of premiership that he had after the 2015 election victory doesn't mean that it wouldn't have happened. The new proposal raises it to 100,000, so you would have been £77,000 better off.
To the good.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what do you think of the proposal as it stands?
I just find it a strange connection between one illness gets it, another illness does. It is an illness. Dementia is a dreadful illness, however you want to look at it. So is cancer. Why are they being separated? And that's the example you give.
I know.
But the question is, why are they being separated?
And it's a historical anomaly, and it's something to do, I think, with the fact that life expectancy has increased the prevalence of dementia on an endemic scale.
Absolutely.
What about this? I want to ask you something, Richard, and I appreciate that you've been living at the sharp end of this. So I bow to your better knowledge of the issue, but not necessarily on the principles of it. What about the argument that if you have accrued wealth, it might not feel like wealth when you're having to sell your mum's house to make sure that she can be properly looked after, but it puts you in you know, the category of wealthy. Where else is the money going to come from? We've got to find money to care for people like your mum. You're quite right to say, well, hang on a minute. They find the money to care for people like his mum over there who's got cancer, but they're not going to find the money to pay. They've got to find it from somewhere else. They kind of have to come after your mum's house, don't they?
Well, Boris promised that there was 350 million a week coming back when we pull out of the EU. It's strapped across his back.
Well, yeah, I don't hold a brief for him either. But in terms of if they've got to find the money somewhere.
Yes, they have. And I personally think it is appropriate that living pay to a certain extent for their care. But if you look at it from the other aspect, my mother befriended the lady she sat next to throughout her dying days.
Yes.
And they got exactly the same standard of bupa care, which is a very high standard. One paid and one didn't.
Because she was lucky enough to be referred by the local authority, was she?
Well, they both were. My mother.
But one had an asset.
Take over and put them in. But the other lady I'm giving the example of, her husband, for whatever reason, and her didn't have a large 4-bedroom detached house. They lived in a council house, so it's all paid for.
And they get the same level of care.
Exactly.
Again, it just feels a little bit unjust, and yet you can't penalise them twice for not having been wealthy. Once by not being homeowners, and then
£5,000 a month.
I hear you. Richard, thank you. I bridled a little bit at the outset of the call. I possibly overreacted, so I apologise to you for that.
And I apologise for not listening properly.
There you go. Everyone's a winner. This is Brexit Britain. 27 minutes after 10 is the time. Stuart's in Guildford. Stuart, what's going on?
Oh, hi, James. I just wanted to talk about my grandmother. She passed away 4 years ago, and she was diagnosed with dementia,
yes.
vascular dementia. She went into a care home 9.5 years before she passed away, and as they get progressively worse, they get put into these lovely sections of the care homes called reminiscence, which is basically where they go on lockdown, because these spirited war generation people tend to go for a walk and try to get back to their houses where they lived before. They have memories of where
yes.
they grew up, so they're effectively on lockdown. This level of care costs nearly £2,000 a week, so £100,000 doesn't cover anywhere near the cost that we spent on looking after Miriam.
How much was spent on Grandma?
Just shy of £1 million.
And where did that come from?
Her house was sold in Leafy, Thames Ditton in Surrey. So there was a house she'd lived in since the 60s, and that covered around £700,000, and the rest came from my parents. And if this approach, this means-tested approach, is going to be put into place by the Conservatives, all that the wealthy people that might have to pay for it will do is transfer and trust their properties to their children. The government will not see a penny of this.
I challenge that up to a point, because under the law as it stands, you've got to do it. If you've done it within 8 years of death, then it doesn't count.
That's what all of our friends do. Most of our friends who have parents in their 60s, all their parents are already transferring the assets to their children. It's done in advance. These are wealthy people for a reason.
And that will need to be, looked at. The numbers don't back up your anecdotal evidence. I mean, it happens, but not on a scale that it qualifies us to extrapolate from your experience the idea that this is going on a grand scale across the country. Most of the time it doesn't happen. But in terms of principle, this is really tricky, isn't it? Because I kind of feel that your grandmother's assets should have been used to care for her, and yet what do you?
I don't disagree with that. But she would be mortified to think that she came from a very poor background in Wales with her husband, and they did good and made a good life for themselves, and she'd be mortified to think that she didn't really know who we were for the last 5 years of her life. And in that respect, she'd be horrified to think that much money was spent looking after when she had no memory.
It's just messier, and the longer these conversations go on, the messier it gets, mate. You and the last fella have both got very poignant stories. You both recognise the probable necessity of taking some of the money from the people that are being cared for, and yet it all feels so uncomfortable and wrong.
But more recently, my great-uncle passed away just 2 weeks ago, and he had both cancer and dementia, and Surrey County Council wouldn't pay to put him into a care home, even though he had cancer as well as dementia.
God.
And there was an argument. He stayed in the Royal Surrey in Guildford for 6 weeks because the family, this particular part of our family, couldn't afford to pay the £1,800 a week that they were going to be charged.
God, man.
And the county council wouldn't put him into a place of comfort for the last 6 weeks of his life.
Which sounds inhuman, but their defence would be, if we did that for everybody in a similar situation, we'd be bankrupt by Christmas.
Yeah, so I think personally we should all pay a bit more tax.
Hang on, no, I'm late for the news, and as you've been speaking, I think I've arrived at the same conclusion as you about taking a little bit off everybody instead of taking everything off somebody like your grandmother. I don't know whether that's going to have legs. We'll find out after this. The social care pledge will leave people helpless, says the expert brought in by the last government to advise on social care. And the way we're talking about it is slightly unnerving, I think, is probably the best way to describe it, isn't it? We're speaking to people who spent £1 million on care for Grandma, money raised in large part by the sale of her home, £350,000 with Richard and his brother sold their mum's home to pay for her care. And the anomalies are legion. She sat next to, became friends with a woman in the same home, receiving the same level of care, who was being funded entirely by the local authority because they didn't have any assets. But we're living in a country now where asset ownership has gone into reverse for the first time in generations. You know, all the young people we've spoken to are never going to own homes. If I was in charge, and I think that Stuart, the last caller, was leading towards this as well, if I was in charge, I think I'd bring in a proper inheritance tax now, so that you'd put a levy on every estate. And if you put a levy on every estate, you'd raise the money that you needed to look after the minority. So you kind of, I mean, it's what the NHS does. It takes money off everybody, but securing the knowledge that not everybody is going to need to cash in what they've paid in. It's what a society is. It's what a community means. Whereas this seems to me to just say, look, here are a bunch of conditions that you'll be cared for with until the end of your life, but here are a couple that you won't be. We'll take your house. I've got no problem with wealth taxes or estate taxes or inheritance taxes. I mean, I've got no problem in the sense that once you accept we've got to find the money somewhere to look after your grandma, it seems perfectly reasonable to me that if she has a large estate, some of the money should come from her. But if she doesn't have a large estate, none of the money can come from her. So the money has to come from who? Me. Everybody. So a small levy on every estate, rather than simply taking all of the money and leaving £100,000 behind on the estates of people who have got the condition. Thinking out loud. You do the same. Caroline is in Whetstone. Caroline, what would you like to say?
Oh, James, you're absolutely spot on this.
Go on.
It's plainly and simply a dementia tax.
Yeah, that's the phrase, isn't it? Yes. Well, yeah, or a dementia levy. I mean, tax is a controversial word.
Well, as you say, it only affects people with dementia, which is a physical disease. It's actually the degeneration of the brain.
Yes, and it's the biggest killer in the country now, bigger than heart disease.
But this is why they've done it. They are so cynical because they realise that because the Alzheimer's Society is great with its message saying, 1 in 3 could get it.
Yes.
So what Tory Central Office is thinking is this is a way to plunder people's assets, quite frankly. I think it's that cynical.
Well, I know you do, and I'm 99% certain that you've been through this mangle yourself, and that's partly why you've arrived at the conclusion you've ended at. And I think you're right, but it's also accurate to say it's a way of raising money to pay for something that has to be paid for somehow.
It is, but it has to be done more fairly, and it can't be just paid for by people who are unlucky enough to have dementia, which is the worst disease you could possibly get anyway.
Yes.
And they're just going to be plane loads of people trooping off to Switzerland.
You're referring to the Dignitas Clinic, as
yes.
a lot of my Twitter and text correspondents have done, some with their tongue in their cheek, many not with their tongue in their cheek at all. You're in the latter category.
And it's quite, as I say, I see it as being quite a cynical policy. And the only fair way of doing it is to merge NHS and social care together, which is what I've been banging on about for ages and ages.
But the costs are immense and the infrastructure's not there, and we're living in an era where public spending is being cast as a bad rather than a good thing, aren't we?
Absolutely, but it has to be paid for, but fairly. It has to be paid for, but it can't be visited at the door of people who are already suffering with this terrible blight on their families. It's just purely wicked.
So, making it fairer for everybody, you can't take money off people who haven't got any assets. So inheritance tax currently kicks in at 40% if your estate's worth more than £325,000. Which for a couple, it'd be half of your threshold can be as much as £850,000 if there's two of you and you've passed on your estate to your children. Where does the money come from? Because
well, the Dilnot report you
yes.
mentioned that came out a few years ago. It had some very, very good recommendations that were going to be taken up and then weren't taken up, and were kicked into the long grass so far that we've not heard about it since.
Most obviously, the idea of some form of insurance so that you can pay in case you get dementia, and then you will be covered. So
absolutely. absolutely. And this was originally going to be a cap of 35,000, which is obviously a lot of money.
Yes.
But that would be spread across the board and would be a way of making sure that everybody contributed something. I think there were exceptions. I can't remember the details.
No, of course, but as it stands, it's like saying to somebody, you can't insure your house against burning down, and if it does burn down, then you're completely on your own. You'll have to pay for all of it until you're down to your last £100,000 of all assets and income. Can I ask you a strange question, Caroline? Would you mind?
Yes, of course.
Because you've heard me say in the past that this is an issue that you just don't care about until it's the only thing you care about. It comes at you like an articulated lorry coming up the hard shoulder, and you're standing, you've never noticed it, and then suddenly, boom, it's the most important thing in your life. I just described you, didn't I?
Yes, sort of.
How do we bridge that gap between people like you who live and breathe this issue because you've been through it in such a raw and unpleasant fashion, and pretty much everybody else who hasn't yet been touched by the curious cocktail of dementia and social care, and just sort of think, yeah, sounds very important, that, but yeah, Brexit, or, you know, what's for tea?
Yes, I think this is the problem,
isn't it?
It is, but I mean, as I say, the Alzheimer's Society have been very good at promoting the fact that many people are going to get it, which, as I say, I believe has been used cynically in this case. But I think people are more aware, much more aware. I've heard people just anecdotally just talking about their worries about the future, and they're not terribly old.
No.
So I think it is hitting home, and I think people are realising that it has to be paid for, but it has to be paid for fairly, and it's not fair that, as I say, people with this condition should foot the bill for everybody. Because
it is. I mean, I'm going to put your phrase up there and see if people want to try and unpick it. It looks to me pretty hard to refute Caroline's description of this proposal as a dementia tax. So already, as a family, remember, not as an individual, but as a family, you are suffering on a scale that the rest of us struggle to imagine. The stories you trip off the tongue very neatly about mum not recognising us anymore, but for those of us who haven't been down that road, even those of us who've lost a parent, it is close to unimaginable. So that family is already suffering on a scale that is thankfully rare-ish, 10% or so. And then they get told that because of this condition that mum's got, we're gonna sell her house. But if mum had various other conditions, mum would be looked after. It's and of course the care at home as well. This is politics at its ugliest, isn't it? Because there is no solution to this that's going to keep all of the people happy all of the time. The solution they've come up with is that those unlucky enough to be hit with this condition, they can pay for it, and everyone else gets off. I lean politically, as you'll know if you listen to the programme on a regular basis, lean much more to the idea that we all pull together in the knowledge that we'll be all right if we're unlucky enough to fall over. But most of us won't fall over. We keep paying because some of us will. And I'm, frightened personally at the moment that we're turning the country into a place where we're actively discouraged from caring for our neighbours, from caring for each other, from caring for our community. We're supposed to start hating on people. You begin in the old-fashioned way by hating on people who are a bit different, but it soon spreads. And you can imagine, can't you, two neighbours just hating each other, ethnically identical. That's so last year to hate people on the grounds of that. Now you're hating them because they haven't got any assets. So they're going to get it for free, and you're going to see your inheritance sold from under you. This is really, really sticky stuff. It's 10:45. My apologies to you. Today's is not a programme that will necessarily clarify any of these complicated issues for you. In fact, I'd say the first step is to recognise just how complicated these issues are, and perhaps to abandon some of our traditional tropes as a nation with regard to wealth and inheritance and similar. You remember, and no one would wish the early death of a father upon anyone, but when the new Duke of Westminster inherited the family fortune at just shy of £10 billion a couple of years ago, if he'd paid normal inheritance tax on that fortune, it would have raised about £4 billion. If he'd paid 40% inheritance tax on the values over 325 grand, would have raised about £4 billion. He paid next to nothing because of trusts. Guess what the national tax receipts on inheritance tax were in that year, in 2015, 2016? Go on, have a guess. 4.7 billion. So if one fortune, admittedly the biggest fortune in the land, if one fortune was taxed at the rate that you and me will have to pay if we leave anything in excess of £325,000, it would have raised almost as much money as the rest of the country put together. One fortune. So the answer probably lies somewhere in inheritance tax and somewhere in trust law, because trusts are a way of ensuring that you keep the fortune intact from generation to generation, because nobody actually gets left it in a conventional sense. The trustees decide from year to year, from generation to generation, who benefits from the money in the pot, but nobody ever actually actively inherits it. If you think that sounds like a wriggle, you're right. It's a wriggle. It's a wriggle designed to protect the biggest fortunes in the country from being used to support the rest of the country. And the biggest fortunes in the country historically will have been made at the expense of the country. You know, the workforce that needs to be educated, the children that need to go to school, the roads that you need to get to the factory. I know that we're not living in an industrial economy really at the moment, but you look at where this money comes from. It comes from the country. It comes from the people of a country. And yet, the bigger the fortune, the more likely it is to be protected. It's just a side order, that, on the whole inheritance tax, dementia tax dichotomy. And I'm going with dementia tax. This policy increasingly, and we've been pretty open today, this policy increasingly looks like an almost unjustifiable decision to tax people whose families are blighted by dementia on a scale that families blighted by other diseases, other medical issues, other fatal conditions are utterly untouched. Incorrigible FCA, one of my favourite correspondents, perspicacious, very perspicacious character, that doesn't think it will get through Parliament, thinks this anomaly will do for it. When this anomaly gets drilled home, the dementia anomaly won't survive parliamentary scrutiny, he says. The policy will be changed before enactment. Changed to what? I don't know. But it's going to have to look like inheritance tax. And who's in charge of the country at the moment? The right-wing media. What's their primary raison d'etre? Protecting the fortunes of their owners. What's the likelihood of there being a root and branch reformation of inheritance tax as long as our media is controlled by incredibly wealthy billionaires, most of whom are avoiding tax? Zilch. But, you know. Ali's in Dartford. Ali, what's going on?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm a bit nervous. I don't normally ring up about serious things. But I feel a bit anxious. I
don't want you to be anxious, but I mean, you know, talk to me.
Well, I mean, this is relative, I promise you, but 4 years ago, my daughter was 15. She started to decline into a really serious illness, which she's still very much in recovery from.
Yes.
About the same time, my dad began his decline into vascular dementia, so it's been a tough time all round.
Of course it has, my love.
But in some ways it's been odd because it was really serious for my daughter. It was a mental illness, it was a psychological syndrome.
Yes.
They're not sure whether it was caused by viral or whatever it was, but it caused her to stop walking, talking, feeding herself.
God.
She sat on the floor, basically banged her head, she rocked. I mean, she would have been put in an institution many years ago.
Yes.
She was that bad.
Oh, Ali.
She didn't talk for 2 years.
Good grief.
So she just wasn't in her right mind, and yet the NHS picked her up and they put her in hospital, and then when that hospital didn't work, they moved her to a private hospital which they funded. And I can't help but draw parallels between... She understands a lot of what my dad's going through because she was completely removed from the world. You couldn't reach her. My dad isn't, luckily, thank God, that bad yet. But, you know, she understands a lot of what Granddad's going through.
I know, but they didn't know what was wrong with her.
They didn't, but they also didn't know that she would recover.
So I think I understand where you're coming from. You're drawing parallels between the two situations. One was funded by the NHS, one you're completely, potentially charged with funding it yourself. But
and it just seems like it's just the way we treat our old people, because it's a mental illness thing again. It's the mental conditions, and I find it so frustrating that they're not treated the same, like you say, as a physical illness. And I just think it's so unfair to families that are already going through this. The last thing you want to be worrying about is how you're going to pay for the care of your loved ones.
Well, yeah, I suppose if I was to be defending the position, I'd say you don't need to worry about how you're going to pay for the care of your loved ones. We're going to sell their house.
Yeah, no, I know, but I suppose so. But, you know, what about... it worries me, James. I just think it's unfair that one group, because she's young, because she's 15 at the time, she gets picked up, whisked away, Yeah, at what point
Yeah, it's not quite that. Listen, I'm not going to start laying down the law on how you see events within your own family, but we can't even contemplate a country yet in which a 15-year-old girl with an undiagnosable, incredibly debilitating condition doesn't receive full care from the NHS. No, I know that's not what you're suggesting for a minute.
No.
It's not the same. You're not comparing apples with oranges. It feels like that to you because you've been right up against both of them, and you see the similarities. But it's not. It is. You know, a 15-year-old with an undiagnosable, debilitating condition needs to get everything the NHS can do, and there aren't many of them. Is the other point to make, in terms of pure pragmatism. Elderly people with dementia is a huge and growing problem.
I know, and I understand that. I just feel so sad that they're just kind of almost not left to rot. I know that's not what happens, but the varying levels of care and degrees of care and the facilities and the actual frontline help. I mean, you know, the frontline help for our daughter wasn't fantastic, but for my mum, who's caring for my dad, there's just nothing for them unless they pay for it. You know, there's no help at all. No one comes in unless it's paid for, and it just makes me very sad.
It feels like there's a cliff edge coming, doesn't it? And I don't really want to say any more than that. It just feels as if this can't sustain. The centre cannot hold. Things will fall apart.
But I just don't know where the money's going to come from. I just wonder.
Well, it has to come from somewhere. The only place it can come from is wealth. I don't see how we could have pay more income tax on it. It has to come from wealth. It has to be a wealth tax, an inheritance tax, an asset tax, call it what you will. But it has to be paid by everybody, even though it will only be accessed by families that are affected by dementia. Don't you think, or not?
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing is, I'm the most unpolitical person you've ever met.
No, you're listening to the wrong programme.
No, but I've been listening a bit more lately. I'm getting a little bit... I mean, I couldn't tell you who I wanted to vote for.
That makes you normal, Ali.
Does it?
Yeah, of course it does. It makes you normal in the sense that you've got an open mind and you see the distinct aroma of BS rising from pretty much every political camp, and there's no point to the tribalism anymore. It doesn't work. This is essentially, I mean, some of what Theresa May is going to announce today, you describe as centre-left policies, not right-wing at all, and yet she's the darling of the hard right because of Brexit and other issues. I don't know. I'm not going to advise you how to vote because I'd be in breach of the Ofcom regulations if I did. But on this issue, it seems to me that the conversation the country needs to have is that one that's been portrayed as very lefty historically, which is a tax on assets left at the end of a life, a tax on estates, an inheritance tax that recognises people with £2 million to leave should probably be chipping into the pot a bit more than people with £200 to leave.
Exactly. But like you said before, it's until you're in the middle of it, is all you can think about.
And that's why, you know, dare I suggest that programmes like this might play a small role in making people who aren't in the middle of it recognise the reality of people like you and all my other callers, notably Caroline, I think, who are, and Richard, who are in the middle of it. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. I'm going to take Theresa May's speech live. We took Jeremy Corbyn's speech live earlier in the week. So we'll just talk around it. I'll have a chat with Theo, have a catch-up with him after the news. Theo Ashwood, our political editor, to come back to some of your calls. And then the switchboard is full at the moment, so I'll do something I hate doing. I make wholesome calls during the speech so that there's room on the switchboard for you to react to what you're hearing once I've had a chance to sort of run a rule over it myself. But for the time being, I'm not moving on from this. I made you a promise. You know, when I go in my slightly pompous mode, and I get all worthy and think that what we're doing together every day might possibly be important in some way, and you will giggle at me. Well, when I was in that mode a few years ago, I made you a promise that despite this being distinctly unsexy, for want of a better word, despite this being a conversation that we're all tempted to look away from, Sheila Fogarty and I particularly passionately believe that it has to be front and centre as often as possible, as much as possible, because out of sight is out of mind. And this necessity has been out of mind for too long. Well, it's not today, and what we're seeing is scary. I am not stupid, I don't think. I hope you'd agree with that. But I feel daunted by the scale of understanding necessary to properly articulate and discuss the social care crisis that this country is in already. It doesn't feel like a crisis unless it's happened to you and yours. From the outside, looking in, you could probably get a handle on the scale of the problems if you stared, but we don't. We look away. In the same way, I said this at the outset, but it was a bit of a mess, my attempt to draw a parallel between the country and each individual attitude. But it's that, it's not going to happen to us thing that we have on a personal level, with everything, I would argue, right through to mortality somewhere. I'm 45. Somewhere inside, I still don't think I'm ever going to die. Yeah, do you know what I mean by that? I can't just be describing a very personal, pathological psychological weirdness on this. You just don't quite believe it's going to happen to you. You know it is, but you don't quite believe it is. You see what I mean? A sort of form of dissonance, cognitive dissonance. And the country seems to be the same. Social care, yeah, look, it's huge, but something will come up. Mr. McCorber, that seems to be our attitude. Something will come up. Well, Theresa May, to give her credit, is not sitting on her hands. She's trying to do something, but I can't at this point in time quibble with Caroline's description of what she's decided to do as a dementia tax. So families with assets, unlucky enough to be suffering under the curse of dementia, lose a significant portion of, well, lose all of those assets effectively, except £100,000. Families with assets who see a loved one perish slowly over a number of years from a horrible cancer don't lose any assets. My fear is, once we accept that you can't move dementia into the same category as cancer, we take a step closer to moving cancer into the same category as dementia, so that we add to the list of things that we pay for ourselves. I told you this was uncomfortable. But that I mean, politically, you know, that's my massive fear. That's why I'm still obsessed with the referendum result, because the people who told deliberate and cynical lies in order to pull off that result seem to me to be the same people telling very similar lies about the NHS and the welfare state, the future of the welfare state. That's why I don't think some of us will ever shut up about it, although, like everybody else, I'd rather we cracked on and found out what the future was going to look like. I'd much rather know sooner than later what the future is going to look like. I'm never going to take one eye off the rearview mirror, because I don't want to see my country conned again. And the people that will suffer the most are the people with the least. And then when you move it into healthcare, and okay, well, you've got money, you'll have to pay. We'll take away all of your money. What distinguishes us from old money? What distinguishes our families from old money, from you know, the ruling classes, from the kind of people that are in the Bullingdon Club and the cabinet, the old cabinet, the last cabinet? What distinguishes? It's the ability, possibly, to put some cash away. And yet we don't know about trusts, you and me, do we? We don't know how trusts work. The wealthier you are, the easier it is to pay somebody to tell you how you can ring-fence your assets from this sort of policy. I told you it was messy. I'm going to stop apologising for that. It's 6 minutes after 11. Nicola's in Ripon in North Yorkshire. Nicola, what would you like to say?
Hi there, I love your show, and I'm a first-time caller, so I'm a little bit nervous.
It's only me. Thank you for the kind words, Nicola.
Okay, basically, all I'm hearing is, through the media and on TV, is about social care for the elderly.
Yes.
And I just want to say on air that, you know, what about young disabled people? There seems to be a big gap in the services available for young disabled people. I mean, I'm 48,
yes,
and I have spina bifida. I've been in a wheelchair all my life. I worked 20 years, and then due to ill health, I had to give up working full-time. So I went part-time,
yes,
and then in 2014, I was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Oh.
So in 2015, I had a mastectomy, and then my cancer came back last year, and I had another mastectomy. And when I was in hospital, both times, I should have only been in hospital for 3 days,
yes,
or maybe just a week. I was in for a month because there was no care available for me to get, and I couldn't get home. The only thing they could offer me was to go into an old people's care home, which obviously when you've been through a traumatic experience like breast cancer, that's the last thing you want.
Yes.
You know, to put, you know, I'm a young person.
I hear you.
And also, you know, there's nothing available. I've got a friend who's got a husband who's tetraplegic, and she's having to care for him now.
Well, that's what they... I mean, you're an anomaly by dint of your family situation, aren't you? Because they would have expected you to go home and be looked after by family members, as they do.
I live on my own.
Clearly, I picked that up from what you've been saying, and that's how you've ended up in the situation you've ended up in, and I wouldn't... Oh God, I mean, it sounds awful. And
it's horrendous.
I don't know what to say to you, actually. This is why we don't have these conversations, Nicola. I lift the lid on something like social care, and I hear about a situation like yours, which every single person listening to this programme is going to think is grossly unfair. They're going to be surprised that it goes on in Britain, but I don't have any answers as to what should have happened differently.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to put out on air that this is what's happening.
That's what we're here for. That's what LBC is for.
When you said about, you know, people worrying about the future, I keep getting told not to worry about the future. Well, of course I'm worried about the future, same as everybody else. But, you know, actually, it just proved when I was in hospital there's actually no care available now. So what is it going to be like when I'm older?
Well, they've been cut since 2010. I don't know how relevant that will be to your situation, whether 15 years ago there would have been a proper care package in place for you. But it's
I've had loads of cuts. My partner, he had a brain tumour on a stroke when he was 24. He was in the middle of a PhD.
Oh God!
And he has not been able to work. He's had 10 work placements when he was just out of hospital, and each one he went to, they said, "I'm sorry, mate, we can't keep you on because you're not fast enough. He can only use one hand, and he's got brain damage, in various sections of his brain." And he's 51 next week, and he's still having to go for assessments for employment support allowance, and he's having to relive the nightmare that he went through at 24. We just went last week for another assessment. He's never going to get better, neither am I.
Yes.
And he went for an assessment at this place about an hour away from where we live.
Yeah.
He's really struggled in the morning to get up, and it takes him a long time to do everything, and we had to be there for 9 o'clock in the morning, and there was just no way he could have done it, so we had to stay the night before in a Premier Inn, which we had to pay for because they wouldn't change the appointment. We got there the following morning to this assessment place, and it was in a car park, multi-storey car park. It was a tiny multi-storey car park, and there was no disabled parking whatsoever. Not even, it wasn't taken, there just wasn't any. And you couldn't get to any of the other levels because there was a chain across the walkway. So we parked in...
Take your time, Nicola. I want to hear your whole story. You get it off your chest. I want to hear it all. Don't hurry. Right.
Okay. He parked into what I would call an able-bodied parking space, which meant I couldn't get my wheelchair out of his car. So I had to reverse the car, get my wheelchair out, then get back in the car and put the car back in the space.
Yes.
And then I went to the pay machine to pay for parking, which was £4. I couldn't reach the pay machine, so if I'd gone on my own, I couldn't have reached it anyway. I mean, he's 6'3", but he's all the time falling because of his hemiplegia. And there was potholes absolutely everywhere in this car park. Anyway, he walked across the car park to put the money in to pay for the ticket. Then he had to walk all the way back to the car to put the ticket in, as you do, as an able-bodied person. Then we had to walk across the road.
All for the privilege of repeating why he needs employment support allowance to an uncaring bureaucrat behind a clipboard.
Never get better, ever.
No. I don't know what to say to you. What can I say to you? I can't say anything to you. This is just wrong.
Yeah, I mean, this is the tip of the iceberg. We've basically got to the front of the assessment centre, which is supposed to be accessible for all.
Yes.
With even a notice on the notice board saying that we make our services all accessible.
Oh, my life. I don't know. Again, these situations, you haven't even rung in about the issue that we were talking about. Social care for people who aren't suffering from dementia, social care for people who aren't old. Again, as with Ali earlier with her 15-year-old daughter, you're a small enough minority to be ignored by society, Nicola. That must be how you feel. I completely understand why. And dementia is not a small enough minority to be ignored by society, but if it was, they'd be ignoring it too. I feel inadequate. I feel impotent. I wish I could say something to you to improve or offer hope, and I can't. And that's why politicians never want to hear stories like yours. But I do, and I will continue to provide a platform for them whenever I can. The news agenda demands that we move on to a couple of other things now. We're going to find out what Theo Usherwood thinks about the looming speech. Going to cross live now to the Old Bailey, where sentencing has taken place on a particularly grim case. Rachel Venables joins us now.
Yes, it is a pretty distressing case, actually, and I think I'm going to warn anyone who's listening now that they might want to turn the radio down for the next couple of minutes, because what we have here is two parents, Jeffrey Wiltshire, who's 52 years old, and his partner, Rosalind Baker, who's 25 years old, and they've both just been sentenced to 11 years in prison for either causing or allowing the death of their little girl, 16-week-old Imani Wiltshire, whose body was found with around 40 rib fractures. She had a fractured wrist, and she also had head injuries that inside court here today the judge described as being similar to those sustained in a car accident or having been dropped from a first-floor window. Now, the particularities of this case are quite distressing, because what happened is she was attacked a number of occasions. We don't know by who or what the incidences of those were last September. Basically, her parents woke up one morning to find that she died in the night, and instead of calling for help, they hatched a plan to hide the evidence. So her mum took her daughter's body in a sling onto a number 25 bus in East London, and that's when she raised the alarm. So paramedics were called. She shouted at passengers for help, and of course it was only later that doctors and the police realised that her little girl had actually been dead several hours before help was called for, and that's why here today they've been sentenced for 11 years each for causing or allowing the death of their little girl.
Rachel Venables live at the Old Bailey with sentencing on a case that I know many of you, like me, found almost unbelievably brutal and grim in its detail. The time is approaching 11:15. We're expecting Theresa May to deliver her speech in the next few minutes or so. LBC's political editor Theo Usherwood is on standby. Should we talk to him before or after the travel news? Let's have a quick word with him now, Theo. You've been sitting there waiting for your chance. Where are we and what's going on?
I'm in Halifax. I am currently looking at some demonstrators from Unite the Union who are parading outside the venue on an industrial estate where Theresa May is about to make her pitch to Labour voters here in what is a marginal constituency. She's going after Labour voters, James, in very much the same way that Tony Blair went after Conservative voters. I was having a conversation with one of her aides who said that one of Theresa May's closest confidants, Nick Timothy, her chief of staff, met with Lord Maurice Glassman a couple of weeks ago. Of course, he is a former advisor to Ed Miliband, the former Labour leader, and an advocate of what is known as Blue Labour. So obviously picking up some tips, and of course what we know about the manifesto so far in terms of migration, the doubling of a levy on workers employing non-EU migrants to £2,000, and of course social care, increasing increasing what is going to be what many Tories would term as a death tax, is very much out of the inkling of of this red Toryism, and much closer to perhaps Ed Miliband's policies and way of thinking than perhaps many Tories on the right of the party would like to think.
Briefly, Theo, will we hear any surprises, or are we living in an era now where, as with budgets, pretty much all of the headlines are written before the speech is delivered?
I think we're going to get some good news, and the reason I say that was that, especially around social care and the idea that there would be, you could pay for your nursing in your own home out of the proceeds of your house once you've died, will go down particularly badly. There'll be a sweetener in this manifesto launch to keep her own party on side. The calculation is, of course, that Theresa May goes into this election, and if the polls are to be believed, could win a substantial majority, and that gives her a room to do what she wants when she's in Parliament, because she won't be having to pander to her own side, because she'd have a much larger majority than the current majority she has of just 17.
Theo, I think someone's nicking your car.
No,
we'll talk again after the speech. You better go and check. It's 11:17. Theresa May has just arrived at the venue in Halifax. With her, she will deliver her manifesto launch in a matter of, well, I don't know, actually, minutes, moments, seconds, one of the above. I will reserve the right to cross immediately to take that speech as and when it commences, but we might squeeze in a couple more calls first. I have begun the cull because obviously I want to keep some phone lines clear for you to comment on what you hear in the speech, but it's fair to say we know the bulk of what will be contained within it. We've concerned ourselves with the social care elements of it because they are by far the most important. Of course, we live in a country where the news agenda, if you like, the things that the rich media owners want you to be talking about, doesn't necessarily include the things that actually affect us the most. So the immigration thing, I thought during Brexit they all said that we were going to make it easier for people to come here from Commonwealth countries. Theresa May is set to announce the doubling of the charge that firms face if they hire workers from outside the EU. And I know what you might be thinking. How come she's doing that? I thought we were leaving the EU. Why do we still have to offer special treatment to EU workers, the ones that are still allowed to come here? And the answer is, well, because any deal that we are set to strike with the European Union will demand that certain things remain in place, regardless of whether we are members or not. That will be one of them. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. Let's go to Hazel, who's in Ealing. Back to the social care question. Hazel, what would you like to say?
Well, just following on from what Nicola was saying earlier, there's been a lot of emphasis so far about residential care and obviously the idea of it being a dementia tax. It's not very clear right now. I've seen some of the reports that they're talking about extending the payments to if you're having home care.
Yes.
And at the moment, they don't.
Well, the £100,000 is the limit above which they'll take your money to pay for domiciliary or residential care, so either in a home or in your own home.
Yeah, but at the moment they don't. If you're in residential care, your house is included as part of your assets.
Which isn't. That's not the case now. It's £23,250 worth of savings. At the moment, is the threshold above which you'll be expected to pay. It comes out of your savings, but they're adding the house is now included in the assets.
So if you're just a disabled person, and say you're in your mid-40s like Nicola was, and you have to have home care...
Which, actually, except she wasn't getting home care.
No, but I'm saying if you're like Nicola at that age, but you were having to get home care, how are you supposed to pay for that? Is the government going to pay it and then have some kind of charge on your house, and when you eventually die a long time later, they'll take it? Or are you meant to do some kind of...
I don't know. I don't know, but I don't want you to get scared. So I don't take my word for this, but I presume that we're talking about people who are above the pensions age.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, because they're not. No one is suggesting that young people with disabilities are going to have a charge put on a house that won't be redeemed for 50 years. This is end of life care, it's called. So it must be defined by age thresholds. But you've put me on the spot, and I'm thinking out loud, Hazel.
Because I haven't seen it reported as end of life care. I've just seen it as adult social care, and that can extend to a really large range of people.
Yes, I'd be amazed if it was that, but then again, you know, I don't have the...
Put it past them.
I wouldn't put it past them, she says. That was kind of what I was trying to avoid saying, but you've said it now.
I don't have to be balanced, though, either.
I'll find out, or I'll try to find out, or someone else listening will know, and they'll tell us. But I'd be astonished if this was to extend this kind of idea of having a charge on your house for the social care that you get in your own home would be extended to young people with disabilities who need looking after. Hazel issued the phrase, I wouldn't put it past them. I couldn't possibly comment. 25 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Theresa May, due to begin her unveiling of the Conservative Party's manifesto in Halifax in a matter of moments. The plan is at 12 o'clock to wade straight into Mystery Hour. I don't know about you, but I will find the light relief that Mystery Hour ordinarily offers up even more welcome than usual. The massed ranks of hacks and activists are gathering in this hall in Halifax, and I will, as I introduce Melissa, who's in Ringwood, remind you that I may have to pull the plug on your call, Melissa, and cross live to Halifax when she starts talking. What do you want to say?
Than me.
Don't know. She's not, actually. Not to me.
Right. No, you're right. Basically, we're in the situation. My father's 86. My mother's 76. My mum has dementia. And quite frankly, if my father wasn't alive now, my mother would have to go into a care home.
Right.
Due to the extent of how bad she's got. We try our hardest, obviously, to take mum from dad for great periods to give him respite.
Yes.
But they have assets. But what gets me is there is already a double tax. The lady earlier on said this new proposal is like an extra tax. But currently, if my mum was to go into a care home that would cost anywhere between sort of 40 to 50,000, she's going to be paying on average 13% more than somebody that's funded by the local authority. That's without the care element. If she needed care, the nursing care on top, there's another 7%. So you are looking at a tax that's already there that people are paying, and the Telegraph did a great article on this, but nobody is pushing that point of why are private patients already funding those local authority patients through no fault of their own. They may have managed to give their assets away.
That's a very Daily Telegraph way of looking at it, and I feel your pain, I really do. But the other way of looking at it would be that because the local authority is a massive customer, they do deals with these homes based upon having hundreds or thousands of clients.
It doesn't add up, no, it doesn't add up to the same figures. The way it's done is that there is a levy put on it so that the private patients are definitely paying a percentage that the local authorities should be paying. I know what you're saying, group purchasing discounts, and then maybe there's a market for some of the charities like the Alzheimer's maybe to get together with families like us.
Yes.
then go into some sort of scheme. But we are already...
There's a premium that's being paid. What makes me uncomfortable, and this isn't you, because you were at great pains to express your compassion for people who are not in a financial position to pay for themselves, but I'm just uncomfortable with the flavour of that observation. Do you know what I mean? That idea that why are we paying for them? I know that's not where you're coming from.
I've not said that.
I know. I said I know that's not where you're coming from. But do you see why I worry it would be very easy for the conversation, not this one, but for look. Imagine what happens when the usual newspapers get hold of it.
Well, you know, you've got to fathom through that. At the end of the day, if you're paying more, there's you know, the Office of Fair Trading, I don't know why they don't look into it as to why you have to pay more.
Well, I think the short answer to that would be who is making the money out of these homes and facilities?
Well, private...
follow the money.
Follow the money, but you may follow the money, but at the end of the day, the councils who are negotiating those great discounts, as you're saying...
Possibly, it's just a theory.
Well, if they're not, then it needs to be looked into, because it is a tax. Money's already been spent on that. We're looking at the situation of we have to fund it. God knows how we'll fund it, but we will fund it. But at the end of the day, we have a choice. Do we put her into a home where we go... to a decent standard, or do we try and find something cheaper because we think, how long is she going to live for? Because we don't know that question.
No,
how much money do we need?
Okay, I'll ask you the question I asked Caroline, because this is the problem. You're living it. I can tell from your voice. This is, I don't know if it keeps you awake at night, but it's...
It keeps you awake. Do you know what?
Go on.
I'm giving my father a week's respite.
Yes.
That means I have to actually go and sleep in with my mum, sometimes in the same bed, because she gets up and she's so confused. I've got a daughter doing A-levels, a son who's doing GCSEs, and a mother who is days, she'll recognise me for 10 minutes at a time. I asked her to put... I mean, you do get funny moments. I asked her, could you give this water to the dog? I handed her a pint glass. I turned around, there's a pint glass in the dog's bowl. You get light moments, but the reality of it is, apart from probably 4 hours a day where she's sleeping, it's like looking after a very, very naughty toddler.
I do. I mean, I get it. I get it because of the job I've got. You get it because of the mum you've got. It's that simple. The challenge is making 90% of the country who won't be directly affected or more, A, accept responsibility for providing more money, and B, understanding the sheer scale of the problem. I don't know how to do that. We'll stop talking about this again tomorrow, and you know, this is a tiny little outpost in the British media. How do you communicate to the majority the plight of a minority? That seems to be the essence of politics, Melissa, to me.
I live near Bournemouth, and I know on Saturday night there's going to be many youngsters, even probably my own daughter, because she's 18, she's going out for the first time. There will be people that drink too much, they will turn up at A&E and they will get treated. Quite right. There's nothing wrong in that. But the point I find difficult is...
Go on.
They can cost an awful lot of money, and you can look for some quite different ways of living.
This is when you frighten me. This is because you're a nice person, and look where you're going with this. You look, do they deserve it? Do they deserve it? Do they deserve it? As soon as someone who deserves it doesn't get it, like your mum, I get a little bit apocalyptic on the politics at the moment because of recent things that have happened and things that I thought had been dead and buried for generations are coming back. Someone who deserves it doesn't get it. It's not going to be that hard for the newspapers to start us looking for other people that we don't think deserve it. And that's two wrongs making a right.
You do it. If people turn up at A&E having had a car crash and they've had an ambulance, the insurance company will pay part of those costs. So there is systems in there. Now, Dill not wanted an insurance policy, and we should have gone down that route. Now, quite frankly, I think there can be many insurance policies that if you want to do certain sports and turn up at A&E, you could pay for it. You could do things, but at the end of the day... This
is the closest we've come to Obamacare. You can't protect yourself against care costs because the private sector won't insure it. The Conservatives could have implemented a proper cap, and then the private sector might have insured it. But the reason why the private sector won't insure it is precisely the reason you just highlighted about not knowing how your mum's going to live, how long your mum is going to live for. So they can't do a calculation on this. They can't say you pay us X pounds for 50 years, and then because they don't know what the maximum's going to be. So it's a mess from every single angle. But I know you're a nice person. I just don't know that the answer is to start looking around for other people who shouldn't get money out of the NHS.
I'm not saying they shouldn't get money out.
You kind of are.
not kind of saying that. Because what I'm kind of saying.
I'm not going to argue with you.
What I'm saying is you contribute on what certain things. If I was to fall over on my high heels because I've drunk half a bottle of vodka, I don't see there's anything wrong in me having to pay £10.
Yeah, well, then you are saying what I just accused you of saying. And what if they thought it was vodka, but you actually had some sort of debilitating? I mean, I just worry that if you think the answer to your mum not getting the help she needs is to take help away from people you don't think need it or deserve it, I just think that's in danger of turning into a circular firing squad. And I feel at the moment that our country is turning into a circular firing squad. But that's just me, Melissa, and you know more about this issue than I do. I'll make that absolutely clear. My job is to know when to go to the news, which I'm doing very late because Theresa May hasn't started talking yet. I suspect Gabby speaks for many of us when she tweets, if Theresa May makes Mystery Hour get cancelled, it'll be a Labour landslide. We are moving into that very dangerous territory now as the front-ranking Conservatives take to the stage in Halifax in preparation for taking their seats now in the front row in preparation for the speech from their leader, from the Prime Minister, Theresa May. The manifesto has been handed out to journalists present. Interestingly, they've gone for the full title of the party, odd perhaps in the current climate that they remind the legacy of Conservative and Unionist party. That's on the front page of the manifesto, and Theresa May will deliver her speech unveiling that manifesto in a matter of moments. I'm going to stay with it, obviously, because it really is just that moment where it could begin now or it could take another couple of minutes. And then, regardless of how long it takes, we'll take the speech in its entirety. Have a quick word with Theo at the end, and then, all things being equal, we'll pile on with Mystery Hour after that. But I think that the manifesto launch of a serving Prime Minister is one of those things that nudges even Mystery Hour into the slightly longer grass. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. There are some amazing comments on contributions to this debate coming in from social media and from text and emails, including one from a fellow I haven't come across before, but 3 or 4 of you now have sent me links to his Twitter feed. Apparently a football journalist called John Maplethorpe who's put it together in a very partisan but very arresting way. I shall probably find time to share that with you when I can dig it out. But if you follow him on Twitter or you want to go and dig him out on Twitter, have a look at his description. He draws a chilling parallel between this and council house ownership. So the Conservative mantra since 1979 would be that you can own a home and therefore have money to pass on to your children. And now it would seem that mantra is essentially being torn up. If you're unlucky enough to get dementia, you will arguably not have enough money to buy a house to pass on to your children. Time approaching 20 to 12. Theresa May due to speak in Halifax shortly. I'm going to have a quick word with Sally and Finchley, although I'll almost certainly have to pull the plug on you, Sally. But you quite like the look of what we think Theresa May is about to announce.
Yes, it has certainly got my attention. I'm a regular listener but a first-time caller, and this has really got my attention.
Go on.
Basically, the reason it's got my attention is because at the moment the threshold is like 23,000. I have a mother with dementia. She's not old. She's 69. She was diagnosed a couple of years ago. Prior to that, she had breast cancer, so I can see a direct comparison between the treatment of the two.
Yes.
You know, it's a situation now where it looks like my father's going to have to sell his home to pay for her care. That's £750 a week, £750 a week. The care is excellent; it's very good, but there's a real financial strain. I mean, it's shocking. And actually, you know, when I see this headline, £100,000 ring fence, you know, it really gets my attention. I was actually.
But I don't want to rain on your parade. The £23,250 threshold is savings only. The £100,000 threshold includes your house.
Right. Okay, I wasn't aware of that. It's just got my attention.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, no, that's good to know that. But, you know, it's... Yeah.
So you thought they were like quadrupling the threshold of the amount of money you'd be able to keep, but in many ways they're doing the opposite of that. They're including the house in the assets in a way that it wasn't previously.
Yeah. I think this is the danger. You know, we see these kind of headlines without really understanding the detail of it, but I can see, you know, why they are making this announcement, because on the surface it looks like a really good thing.
Well, the Daily Mail sell it as you won't have to sell home to pay for your care, and I mean, you can see why they've chopped it up like that. But you turn to the Times, which is arguably a slightly more measured organ, and it tells you that thousands will be hit by new care costs. So I think it's just a question of when you have to pay, not whether you have to pay.
I think a slightly another issue that I'd just like to quickly raise is that I think, you know, this difference between cancer and dementia for care with the NHS, I think that I just don't understand. You know, my mum is...
I think it's just history. I think it's just tradition. Is that dementia wasn't a thing when we were younger because people didn't live as long, and the longer you live, the more likely you are to get dementia. So it's grown and grown and grown as a problem. And the NHS historically hasn't been at the front line of dealing with it. It has been the care sector.
Yeah.
And that's why. Yeah, I know. It makes no sense logically. If you were trying to explain it from scratch, you couldn't. But we're not explaining it from scratch. We're explaining it at the end of a process, not at the beginning.
Yeah, but I'm so glad that you're raising this issue because it's very real and it affects so many.
I know, and I don't know how to keep raising it when it's not on the political agenda. That's the problem, but that's my problem, Sally. That's not yours. I wish your mum the very best. I really do. It's coming up to 11:43. Still waiting for Theresa May to deliver the manifesto launch up in Halifax. I don't think she's been delayed by the protests outside that our political editor Theo Usherwood was describing a short while ago. All of the front bench, all of the heavy hitters are in the room now, sitting in the front seats of the audience. Boris Johnson has turned up, not wearing his turban today. Paul's in Sheffield. Paul, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. I'll make it quick because I don't want to be cut off.
No, you've got. I want you to be cut off. You know, this is you're helping me fill space, Paul. No offence. Okay. I don't want you to feel unwelcome.
No. James, just a few quick points, and you've nailed them. We've seen it now that it's going to be people who are deserving of care.
Yeah.
My problem is I've worked for NHS since 1988. It's always been the same. And the problem I think you're going to have is, as you mentioned, 90% of the population won't at this moment in time be affected by this. I think it's hard to garner any sympathy from people, I beg your pardon, who are living from hand to mouth.
Yeah.
This seems like pie in the sky. It won't affect them. But can it just be it's an end at wedge? Because I've seen dementia care. It's the new care of the elderly. And I'm going to make a point now. It's because it's not sexy.
No.
It's the new care of the elderly. And that's not being disrespectful because I'm a nurse. I've worked in care of elderly. You work in ICU, you work in CCU, you work on children's ward. That's where the money goes.
So we're moving as a society towards an abandonment of the elderly, is your fear?
What I think we're doing, James, is testing the water. Let's see if this one's got wings.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to affect a lot of people. Well, 10% of the population, I would suggest, is a lot of people. But let's start on this one, and then let's move a little bit. Let's go back to elderly. Because, you know...
I would like to offer you words of comfort. I see where you're coming from. You're a nurse, so you're closer to the coalface than I am, so to speak. But there has to come a point where we recognise we're a country, a community, a society, doesn't there? Rather than just a disparate collection of individuals and individual interests.
I'd love that to be true, James. And if we were truly serious about that, the notion of a penny on income tax, everybody would say, yes, please.
And, you know, we've managed to conduct most of this conversation without mentioning immigration. The problem is that as long as the immigration genie is out of the bottle, people are going to keep acting against their own interest because they think they're acting against the interests of immigrants, not against the interests of themselves. So make people pay for stuff, make it harder to access, as soon as you do that to one person, it's easier to do it to you.
One of the things is, James, just a quick one if I may.
Yeah, David Davis is speaking, but I'd rather listen to you. But as soon as Theresa May talks, we're off, all right?
One of the things you mentioned this morning is the £2,000 tariff that's going to be put on workers from non-EU countries. Now, I work for NHS. Now, would that apply? Because I work with people from Africa, from India.
I will find out for you. But Paul, as I warned you, we're crossing live to Halifax, where Theresa May has just skipped onto the stage.
Thank you very much. Today, as we face this critical election for our country, I launch my manifesto for Britain's future. A manifesto to see us through Brexit and beyond. A plan for a stronger, fairer, more prosperous Britain. A plan to seize the opportunities ahead and to build a country that our children and grandchildren are proud to call home. It is a detailed programme for government, rooted in the hopes and aspirations of ordinary working people across the land. But it is more than that. It is a vision for Britain, a portrait of the kind of country I want this nation to be after Brexit, as we chart our own way in the world. For at this defining moment for the United Kingdom, as we embark on this momentous journey for our nation, we have a chance to step back and ask ourselves what kind of country we want to build together. I believe that our United Kingdom can emerge from this period of national change stronger, fairer, and more prosperous than ever before. I believe we can be a country that stands tall in the world and provides leadership on some of the greatest challenges of our time. And I believe we can and must take this opportunity to build a great meritocracy here in Britain. Now, let me be clear about what that means. It means making Britain a country where everyone, of whatever background, has the chance to go as far as their talent and their hard work will take them. A country that asks not where you have come from, but where you are going to. It means making Britain a country that works not for the privileged few, but for everyone. A country where it doesn't matter where you were born, who your parents are, where you went to school, what your accent sounds like, what God you worship, whether you're a man or a woman, gay or straight, or black or white. A country in which all that matters is the talent you have and how hard you're prepared to work. And that is the kind of Britain I want us to build together. Because as we leave the European Union and set ourselves a new course, we need to make the most of all the talent in this country. For Britain to succeed, we need to unleash the ability of every person, harness the creativity of every business, support the ambition and entrepreneurialism of every sector. We need to embrace the opportunities before us with confidence, believing in Britain and in the enduring power of the British spirit. And we need to look forward, not back, believing that despite our great heritage, we have an even greater future, and that we can build that brighter future together. Let us be in no doubt, it will not be easy. There will be obstacles in our way. There will be some who wish us to fall short, others who wish to hold us back, many who will us to fail. But with discipline and focus, effort and hard work, and above all, a unity of purpose stretching across this precious union of nations, from north to south and east to west, I believe we can and must go forward together. To do that, we need a new contract between government and people. We need a government that is strong enough to act and humble enough to listen, responsive enough to people's needs, and stable enough to get on with the job and deliver. And we need to unite behind a clear plan to make the most of the opportunities ahead. That is what this manifesto offers, a clear plan to meet the big challenges we face together, a credible, deliverable programme for government around which the country can unite, a plan that, unlike the offerings of other parties, is upfront and honest about the scale of the task we face. What we say in it, we will do, and the scale of our ambition is clear. Because it is the responsibility of leadership to be upfront and straight with people about the challenges ahead, about the difficult decisions and trade-offs that need to be made, and the hard work required to overcome the obstacles in our way. And that is what this manifesto does. It identifies the 5 great giant challenges that we face as a country. 1, the need for a strong economy. 2, responding to Brexit and a changing world. 3, tackling enduring social divisions. 4, responding to an ageing society. And 5, facing up to fast-changing technology. and it sets out what we will do to address each one. And in doing so, it offers a vision for Britain, not just for the next 5 years, but for the years and decades ahead. A stronger Britain, where everyone has the economic security they need and the chance to live a secure and full life. A more prosperous Britain, where each generation can do better than the last. But all of this depends on getting the next 5 years right. Make no mistake, the central challenge we face is negotiating the best deal for Britain in Europe. Our future prosperity, our place in the world, our standard of living, the opportunities we want for our children and our children's children, each and every one depends on having the strongest possible hand as we enter those negotiations in order to get the best Brexit deal for families across this country. If we fail, the consequences for Britain and for the economic security of ordinary working people will be dire. If we succeed, the opportunities ahead of us are great. I've negotiated for Britain in Europe, and I know that the best place to start is to be clear about where you stand and what you want. That's why I have been clear that we do not seek to fudge this issue, to be half in and half out of the EU. The British people made their choice. I respect that. And I respect the view of the other European leaders who agree we can't be half in, half out either. So we will leave the European Union and take control of our money, take control of our borders, take control of our laws. We will forge a new, deep and special partnership with Europe, but reach out beyond Europe to strike new trade deals for our goods and services with old allies and new friends around the world too. We will make the decisions that matter to Britain here in Britain and be a great global trading nation that stands tall in the world once again. And if we get Brexit right, we can use this moment of change to build a stronger, fairer, more prosperous Britain here at home. That is the real prize, the goal towards which we must work. Because for too many people in Britain today, life is simply much harder than many seem to think or realise. They're not ideological. They don't buy into grand visions. They aren't fooled by politicians who promise the earth and claim no tough choices are required. They make those choices every day in their own lives and understand that politicians who aspire to lead must do the same. They don't ask for much. They just want to get on with their lives, to do the best for their children, and to be given a fair chance. And they look to their government for help and support. This party, the Conservative and Unionist Party, will be that government. For while it is never true that government has all the answers, government, put squarely at the service of ordinary working people, can and should be a force for good. A force that steps up and acts in the interests of ordinary working people, that does not ignore them or walk on by on the other side, but serves the interests of the mainstream of the British public. With the right Brexit deal secured, my mainstream government will deliver for mainstream Britain. All those who work hard and make this country what it is. People who have a job but don't always have job security. People who own their home but worry about paying the mortgage. People who can just about manage but worry about the cost of living and getting their children into a good school. And that is why the government I lead will ensure that every area of this United Kingdom is able to prosper with a modern industrial strategy to spread opportunity across the whole country. Why the government I lead will build a Britain in which work pays, with a higher national living wage and proper rights and protections at work. Why the government I lead will keep taxes low and cap rip-off energy tariffs to help families who are working all the hours they can to pay the bills. Why we will help those struggling to afford a home of their own by building more affordable homes. It's why the government I lead will build a Britain in which the economy is strong to support world-class public services, with the most ambitious programme of investment in technology and buildings the NHS has ever seen. Record and fair funding for schools, real technical education for young people, and the first ever proper plan to pay for and provide social care. Because strong public services don't just provide security and enhance opportunity. They are vital local and national institutions that bring us all together. And it is why the government I lead will be relentless in tackling burning injustices like discrimination on the basis of race, gender, mental health or disability. For injustice is a scar on the soul of our nation, and I will fight it wherever it is found. So, for example, we will introduce the first new mental health bill for 30 years to put parity of esteem at the heart of treatment and end the stigma of mental illness once and for all. But most important of all, the government I lead will provide strong and stable leadership to see us through Brexit and beyond, tackling the long-term challenges we face and ensuring everyone in our country has the chance to get on in life. We need that strong and stable leadership now more than ever. For the next 5 years will be among the most challenging in our lifetime, a defining period for our nation, a turning point for Britain that will determine the kind of country we are and the kind of future the generations that come after us will see. That is why now, more than ever, Britain needs strong and stable government. Why now, more than ever, Britain needs strong leadership to make the most of the opportunities Brexit will bring. Now, more than ever, Britain needs a clear plan and the determination and the will to see it through. And it is why, in this election, more than in any before, it is time to put the old tribal politics behind us and to come together in the national interest, united in our desire to make a success of Brexit, united in our desire to get the right result for Britain, because every vote for me and my team in this election will strengthen my hand in the negotiations to come. Every vote for me and my team will be a vote to get on with the job of delivering Brexit and delivering a stronger, more secure future for all. Every vote for me and my team will be a vote for a stronger, fairer, more prosperous Britain. And after all that has passed, that is a vision of the future that can bring us together. So I offer myself as your Prime Minister, with a resolute determination to get on with the job of delivering Brexit, optimism that I can get a deal that works for all, and confident in the belief we have the vision, the plan and the will to use this moment to build a better Britain. With the right deal for Britain abroad, taking back control of our borders, our money and our laws, and a better deal for ordinary working people at home. A modern industrial strategy to spread prosperity and opportunity around the country. Exploiting the opportunities of technology to attract the jobs of the future to Britain. Relief on family energy bills and the cost of living. More secure, well-paid jobs and new protections for workers. The chance to own a home and more affordable housing. A good school place for every child with more money for schools every year. A strong economy to fund our NHS and give you the security you need. A stronger, fairer, more prosperous Britain that works for everyone, not just a privileged few. That is the goal, that is the plan, and now is the time. So join me on this journey. Come with me as I lead Britain. Strengthen my hand as I fight for Britain, and stand with me as I deliver for Britain. And with confidence in ourselves and a unity of purpose in our country, let us all go forward together.
It's 12:01, and that concludes Theresa May's speech launching the Conservative Party manifesto. The massed ranks of hacks in the room have already been leafing through the document that they were given, and there's a couple of interesting things to emerge from it. There's not going to be any Leveson 2. Whether or not the copies of the manifesto are going to be delivered to the offices of Messrs Dacre and Murdoch with a lovely sort of rosette and ribbon on top of them, I haven't been able to establish yet, but they'll be absolutely delighted that there's not going to be any second round of the Leveson inquiry. I wonder what they'll give her in return. We'll find out on tomorrow's front pages. And also the mooted possibility of a national police force. Don't panic if you're a copper. It won't affect most of you, but the idea that the Ministry of Defence Police, the British Transport Police and the specific nuclear protection police force will somehow be merged, that's in the small print as well. Do a little bit of reaction to that speech from Theresa May. The detail is going to be, the devil rather is going to be in the detail, and the detail will be what the journalists currently poring over the documents handed out in Halifax unearth and discover. I don't think there were any major surprises in that speech, although it may be that we missed them, because as someone has just texted, I listen to your show every day, so I'm no stranger to waffle. What? However, that speech was really waffly. How dare you? That's just rude. Theo Usherwood is in Halifax. Just letting you know, Theo Usherwood is in Halifax. He's not on the end of the line or anything like that. He's just in Halifax. I thought you'd want to know. I know you care about Theo just as much as I do. Take Mystery Hour from about 15:15, I think. We'll run it a little later than usual this week and get some early reaction. Although all the people ringing in with Mystery Hour questions. Shall I go to them and ask them what they thought of Theresa May's speech? Just for comedy value. This is why we're breaking records on this radio programme. We take risks like that. We push envelopes. No, we'll just confine our conversation to Theo Usherwood in a moment. Here it is. It was Thomas in Leicester said that. I listen to your show most days, so I'm no stranger to waffle. Ha, ha, ha. But that speech was the most waffling load of nonsense I have ever heard. I'll read them at random, OK? In no particular, the order that they've come in. Theresa May should have just said, we will make Britain great again, because I didn't actually hear any policies, just talk about how much better it will all be. Well, Jack, mate, it's the speech to launch the manifesto. The policies and the detail are in the manifesto. That's the document that was handed out just before the speech. And here's another genius. the single most unsurprising speech by any wannabe PM I can imagine. She should change her name to Theresa Me. Majority of that was me. Just copied her Brexit means Brexit speech. Awful, awful, blooming awful. But you know she's going to win. Embarrassing and hollow rhetoric, says Jin. Surprised Land of Hope and Glory wasn't playing as she reached the end. Over-rehearsed, lots of my, I and me. Mental health parity of esteem. God help us. Country that works for everyone. Nope. Proper plan for social care. Says Cindy. I'm just looking for something a little bit more positive. Not going to get it here. She said absolutely nothing as always. I'm sorry, but Theresa May doesn't sound or appear convincing. Let's abandon tribal politics where people are allowed to disagree. I don't know that that's fair, Nicholas, actually. You've added the second bit of that. She definitely said the first bit, sounding more and more like a dictator in waiting. Many issues here to cover. Have we got Theo Usherwood on the line? We can't get hold of Theo, so we will probably hold fire on that conversation and get Mystery Hour up and running a little earlier. It's entirely up to you. The phone lines have gone nuts already, and I haven't even mentioned what we're going to do next. A little bit more reaction from social media, perhaps from the texts and tweets coming in to the studio. I'm just going to look for some positive ones, though. That's the challenge I've got at the moment. Nope. Well, I apologise. Send me some positive tweets about that speech and I can read them out, OK? So that would be one way forward. She said absolutely nothing as always. No. All right.